back to Health and Wellness here on Northwest Digital News. Jody Summers, Kevin Hunter, and Kyle Torgerson here. We're going to talk about food labels today. And Jody, I want you to open with the most profound statement you can make about all of this. What's true about real food?
It doesn't have a food label. There we go. Okay, we're done now. It was nice chatting with you.
Quick show. Boom, done.
Real food doesn't have food labels. So now let's address the issue with food labels for those people that like to eat this food that does have labels on it. And you know what? I think this is funny in that the reason why food labels are required, in my opinion, you can correct me if I'm wrong or add whatever to it, but I think the reason they have to put a label on this thing they call food is because they're legally obligated to tell you what additional chemicals and things like that they put into what started out as food.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's an industry thing. It's not a health thing. It's for industry standards. I mean, if you kind of can ignore some of that, then you'll get back to the real food.
I had to when you even proposed this idea of talking about food labels, I had to think about it for a while because it's actually been a really long time since I looked at a food label at all. Mm-hmm. And the groceries that come home regularly that my wife picks up at the grocery store and other farmers markets and places, there's no food labels on them. So, yeah. Okay.
So really, what real food does, it doesn't require a label. Meats and vegetables and fruits, they don't come with a label because they're real food, and they're very minimally processed. So what a food label does is it tells you more about the calories and all of the details rather than the quality. It has nothing to do with the quality of food. In fact, it's an emphasis on calories and different things that really, some people can use as a guide. And certainly there is real food, like, you can get tuna in a can that is helpful, and it's, you can have it, but you're not going to gorge on tuna anyway. So it's not like if you're eating real food, even the ones that have labels, generally, again, it's something that's really not very necessary.
Yeah, totally agree.
Other foods that don't require, and I thought as I was preparing for this, I thought it was really interesting. That some of the foods that don't require food labels at all are medical foods and hospital foods. And because if you look at the food that's served in hospitals, which we have to do a show on that, they don't require patients even seeing the label of those foods because they're really not sometimes real. Other things that don't require a food label are airline foods, restaurant foods, although some restaurants are putting up some food information.
Let's talk about the American Heart Association because besides a lot of other organizations getting involved in labeling of food, what are some of the recommendations that the American Heart Association has with regard to things like sugars or proteins, etc., and how does that then compare to what we're actually seeing on some of these labels?
So according to the American Heart Association, the women should have no more than 25 grams or 6 teaspoons of added sugar each day. Okay, 6 teaspoons, and we are eating as a United States, we're eating way more than that. Sometimes 6 teaspoons in one product. Men are suggested to have no more than 37 grams of added sugar or 9 teaspoons. But again, as you look at that, if you really look at it, so to me, it makes more sense with weight. A 100-pound person is going to be different than a 250-pound person. Now, granted, generally men weigh more than women, but that's not always the case. So instead of looking at even some of the guidelines, to me, even some of the basic guidelines are not even in their foundation correct to start. But some of the things, the food labels were changed back in May of 2016. And on the screen here is the original label that we've grown up with, and then the new label from last year. And you can see that the emphasis, the bigger images are put on calories. And we've talked many times on this show that calories are I won't say they're not important because you have to glance at them, but they're less important than quality. And so if you look at, again, what as these have been changed, what's been emphasized, and one of the things I've learned, which I did not know until I started putting this information together, and I think this is amazing, that when these were changed, let me actually read to you what I wrote. When they were changed, serving size was increased to show what people eat, not what is recommended. So it's like, let's just change our recommendations upon people's bad eating habits to make it look like you're eating better according to the food manufacturers. It's so stupid. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox.
Yeah, I'm sorry for laughing, but I'm just like this. Yeah, there is so much stupidity, and you know what? When you mention that, this huge emphasis, like you look at this label right above Jody, where the calories say 230 there, and it's this little small print, and then the label directly above me, the new one, calories, huge, bold, 230, and I have friends and other people that I know that are in the weight management business, if you would call it that. And there's a ton of emphasis around calories in their methodology. And whenever I see this, I immediately know that whoever's publishing this, whoever's putting this message out, actually doesn't know that much about nutrition, because calorie is not the central focus of a good nutritional plan ever.
Ever. I can't ever think of a time, even if somebody's really, really sick in the hospital, it's not about high caloric foods, it's about high quality foods. And I mean, I can't think of, maybe there is an example, but I cannot think of an example where calories are more important than quality. So what you do want to look for is, if you're going to look at food labels, for example, let's say you're using canned tuna because you're on a trip or whatever, or you're making a soup and you're putting in beans, but you're using canned beans. And again, I'm not saying never use canned beans or don't eat tuna out of a can, but those are the kind of things that you want to look for 5 or fewer ingredients. So if you're looking at canned tuna, generally there's going to be tuna, water, and salt. Okay, that's less than 5. So that's still a whole real food, even though it's in a can. Beans, for example, might have beans, a little bit of sugar, maybe salt, sodium, and water. And again, 5 or less ingredients is one thing that might be a good guideline to look for. Close, all of those things the same things that we look for in Whole Foods, something that's close to nature, that doesn't have things that you can't read. Here's another thing that we didn't talk about before the show, but it's very important to talk about, is that sometimes on the front of something it'll say contains no hydrogenated oil. But you turn it around and on the label under the list of ingredients it says hydrogenated oil of some kind. And you just turn it around, it says contains none, but on the label it contains some. And here's how they can get away with that. According to the FDA, the guideline to have to say there's no hydrogenated oil, or the front may say no trans fat, which is the same thing, is it has to be per serving a certain amount below. And I don't know that number, but if the food company comes out with a product and says, for example, and I'm just making this up, but let's just say it's a tortilla, and on the front it says no trans fat, but on the back it says hydrogenated oil. So if you look at the serving size, they could potentially make a serving size 1/2 of the tortilla. So the amount of trans fat or hydrogenated oil falls below that recommended, so they can put on the front contains no trans fat or no hydrogenated oil. So really what you need to do is ignore that front label that says no. If it says no trans fats, there's probably trans fats in it.
Right. Isn't that interesting? Because what's on the front is essentially marketing. Now let's talk about some of the common foods. Kyle just put up a can of tomato soup here. This is a very common one. that you find. In fact, I look at this package and I notice that, you know, it doesn't look like the metal cans that I was accustomed to seeing years ago, but that's actually how long it's been since I've looked at a can of tomato soup, because if we use any tomato sauces of any kind in our house, my wife makes them out of tomato and skins them.
No, you're kidding.
Yeah, makes it out of tomato. Skins the tomato, takes the seeds out of them, and then just uses the pink fleshy area. And there's a nutritional reason why she does that. But anyway, so let's go back to this can of tomato soup. What's some of the common things that people are seeing on this label, or what did you want to say about tomato soup?
Okay, so one of the reasons that I sent this particular tomato soup compared to a can, you still can get tomato soup in a can, but one of the reasons that I sent this is because it's single serving. And I picked this one on purpose because it's easier to see rather than do the math. And I don't know if, Kyle, you can actually click on if that's a live image or it's just whatever, but if you can click on that nutritional facts, it'll take us to the label. But I'll tell you, oh, there it is. Perfect, you're awesome. The reason I chose this is because it's a single serving container, and that just makes it easy to look at. Okay, so let's look at it. One serving contains, I can't see it on my screen, but I'm going to look on my notes. One serving contains 32 grams of net carbohydrates, but isn't it 30 of those are just sugars?
It says like 20 are just sugar.
Oh, 20. Okay, I'm sorry. I can't see it from my screen. So that's just added sugar. That's like if you're supposed to have, if the American Heart Association is supposed to, we're supposed to limit our sugars to either 6 teaspoons or 9 teaspoons, and there's 4 grams in a teaspoon, then this almost exceeds or almost gets to the actual maximum allowed if you're following the American Heart Association. So food labels do tell you things. They tell you that this is nothing but sugar. But they don't really, they're, again, if you want really whole food, eat whole food if you want nutritional food. The other thing that this tells you is that there's very little protein in there. There's almost non-existent vitamins and minerals. And we've been trained that tomato soup is fairly healthy, but it's really just a can of sugar.
That's pretty much what it is. So when I mention about Steph making our own tomato, if we use it, it's because, you know, she doesn't have to put up with all that extra sugar.
Right.
It's interesting. How about a really popular one is all the yogurts, and you wanted to pick on Greek yogurt here today. I just want to mention about yogurts in particular, like all the different yogurts that are out there, because a lot of people walk, you know, through those dairy sections and they'll see yogurts and excuse me, all these labels that say probiotics and all these different things that sound like they're good for you, but yet this yogurt section is actually one of the biggest junk food sections in the whole store.
I thank you. We could end right there. Just those 2 comments that you know, real food doesn't have labels and yogurt is junk food. I mean, there is a time and a place for a little bit of yogurt if you're putting it on a little bit of fruit or something because it tastes good, but as a whole, it is not a nutritional food. They're so full of, if you want to glance at that sugar, I believe there's 18 grams of is it? Again, I can't see the screen, but the added sugar. And oftentimes, and this is a really good brand. I mean, I'm not picking on this brand particularly, but I chose it because it's considered one of the healthier brands of yogurt. But it's still very high in carbohydrates that don't, you know, non-fibrous carbohydrates, because vegetables are carbohydrates, but they're fibrous. And it has oftentimes, you know, added sugars. And so you just, I guess what food labels does tell you is when they add sugars. So that's a good thing, I suppose.
Well, you know, the interesting part about it is that when you think about yogurt and where it comes from, and it always amuses me that you see all these labels in that dairy section that will say fat-free, and that has had the, you know, creates the connotation to the buyer who doesn't know about, you know, the importance of fats. Makes it seem like this is now a health food because, oh, look at that, you know, they took the fat out. Well, the problem is they actually took a good part of the food out, which is the fat. And then in order to make it taste decent, because the fat had a lot to do with its flavor to begin with, In order to make it taste decent, well, then they add back in all these sugars and other things. So every time you pull something out of a food, you're putting something back in. And it walks away from being a natural food very rapidly when you start doing additions and subtractions.
And we don't have to look at all the different food labels, but one of the things that you want to, when you are looking at a food label, to look for, if it says fortified on it, and I should have sent you something that was a cereal, which is very common in this business. They fortify cereals. So one of the keywords that you want to look for on foods, if it says fortified, all that means is all the natural nutrients have been stripped out and synthetic vitamins and minerals have been put back in. So they've ripped out the healthy fats or the whatever it is and put back in a synthetic vitamin, which oftentimes, I should have sent you this. One of my absolute, just, it makes me so angry is when I see orange juice that says fortified with vitamin D. Well, one, they're fortifying it with the wrong kind of vitamin D. It's very hard to absorb. And vitamin D is fat-soluble vitamin. It's actually a hormone, but it's okay.
Yes.
So you need fat to absorb the vitamin D, but orange juice, by its very nature, is free of fat and high in sugar. So even if it was the right vitamin D, it's not being absorbed by your body because they're putting it in something that it's useless. So anytime you see fortified, it's a key word of put that food down.
Yeah, exactly. I want to pick on another food quickly here before we run out of time. And these are like these cereal bars or the health bars, and you see like tons of those. The home I was living in prior, my elderly neighbor would buy like cases of these. There you go, bars like this, cases of them, and he'd like be looking at the labels on there and like how great these things are. And it was part of his daily meal plan was consuming some of these bars, and he offered them to me a few times, and I was just like, no thanks, and just explain, that I eat food. But it's just amazing to me, especially our older populations, how many of them. Kyle and I were at a home here recently where an elderly couple lives, and this was one of the boxes sitting on the floor in the kitchen.
And what I didn't do, which again, we could do a whole show on comparing this to a candy bar food label. We should do that. I will take food labels and people can guess, is this a candy bar or a whatever they call this, a protein bar? I don't know what this one would even be called, but a health food bar or whatever. If you look at the label, ingredient for ingredient and nutrient for nutrient, a candy bar is the same, and it does the same as in your blood sugar. Now, I think some of them do have some more nuts than others, which can add for fiber. But again, it's, eat real food. I mean, that's just the bottom line. Just eat food. And
if it's got a label on it, that's a clue. It's probably not a real food.
In general, there are exceptions, but in general, if it has a label, it's not real food.
All right.
It's not nutrient-dense whole food. How's that?
Absolutely. Well, that's going to do it here on Health and Wellness with Jody Summers. I hope you took this all seriously. And if you were here on the show right in the beginning, if you joined us late, you need to go back and watch the recorded part of the show, because the best information was actually happened in the first 30 seconds. And that is, real food doesn't have labels. I hope that sunk in. All right, Kevin Hunter with Jody Summers, Kyle Torgerson here on Health and Wellness on Northwest Digital News. Thanks for joining us.
This concludes today's live programming on Northwest Digital News. Thanks for joining us for this special broadcast. Heard around the world in more than 70 countries on YouTube, Instagram, Patreon, Facebook, and Twitch TV. If you enjoyed a story or guest we had here on Northwest Digital News and would like to strut your stuff on the broadcast, email us today at wainfo2017@gmail.com or call or text 360-545-3501. We're always interested in unique stories, topics, and guests to share with our worldwide audience. Before you go, don't forget to give us a big thumbs up and comment on the live stream. And for those of you who'd like to financially support the broadcast, you can do so at patreon.com/Northwest Digital News. We thank you for your patronage. On behalf of Chris Bornstead, Kyle Torgerson, Stephanie Hunter, and all the people that made this broadcast possible, I'm Kevin Hunter. Till next time, take care.